Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're joining us from. My name is Edith Kimani. I'm a journalist with Germany's international broadcaster, and I will be taking you through this program. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you all on behalf of FNF and CARE. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us here today. Now, CARE International publishes a report annually, the 10 most underreported humanitarian crises. And this has been done for the last 5 years. This report analyzes those humanitarian crises that received the least media attention each year and also trying to figure out why. And so today we'll be looking at the 5th poorest country in the world. I'm talking about Burundi. And we'll hear from our esteemed panel that I will introduce shortly, how scarcity of arable land and natural disasters, among other things, have left 2.3 million Burundians in need of humanitarian aid. Now, this is the 4th time, you should know, Burundi is in this list of 10 underreported humanitarian crises, and this has been done for 5 years. We'd also love to hear from you, our audience, and as such, we'd like to know from you why you think that some crises make headlines while others do not. Feel free to use the Q&A function on Zoom, and I'll be reading your reactions as well as questions throughout the conversation. It's now my pleasure to introduce our guests, and I would like to begin with Mr. Afurika Juvenal. He is the country director of CARE in Burundi. He's also a senior international development and humanitarian professional with over 25 years of extensive strategic, technical, and managerial experience. Thank you very much, Afurika. We're also joined by Pierre-Emmanuel Ngendakumana. He is a Burundian national, currently living in Germany, but Pierre has many years of journalistic experience in Burundi, having worked as a journalist for Iwasu Burundi newspaper, where he was the editor for the Iwasu online English service, as a reporter for the weekly newspaper publishing in the French language. So thank you for joining us, Pierre. Now we'll kick off the program with some opening remarks from Afurika, and then we'll proceed with the Q&A after that. Afurika, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Edith. And I wish to start off by thanking you all for being here and for me having the opportunity to be here and to share about Burundi. Burundi is a very beautiful and youthful country on the shores of very beautiful Lake Tanganyika. The lake is beautiful and resourceful and it's safe, actually. Right, you can't swim necessarily in it because of crocodile and hippos, but there is no methane underneath. So it's a beautiful and resourceful lake. So I'm here to talk about Burundi and the crisis in Burundi and why it is underreported and what is the context in general and what we are doing about it. The crisis in Burundi presently, so you might know, Burundi is emerging from a long history of colonialism, instability, political and social instability, tragedies, sometimes big ones like with huge human losses. And presently we have a number of shocks, crisis shock which accumulate and compound each other into really a major humanitarian crisis. First of all, of course, in the context of the global pandemic of COVID-19, we have a major climate crisis. We have the beautiful lake, which is rising, have been rising for the past basically 3 years, and flooding large chunk of farmland, destroying infrastructures, displacing a huge number of population in the lowlands. And that's happening in the context of internal and actually displacement of population, those affected by the floods, but also we have refugees who sought refuge in Burundi, and we have Burundians who sought refuge outside the country. So climate crisis, internal displacement in the context of a weak economy, weak socio-political infrastructure, and that all of course, pose the problem of what would happen if things keep going unchecked. And of course, everybody has in back on mind what happened, the history of the country, and no one wants to see a sliding back or sliding deep with major repercussion to the neighboring countries. So the crisis is there mainly because of what I just said, and also the fact that local capacities, resources of the government, including international actors, those capacities are overwhelmed. Yes, and of course it's difficult not to talk about the present crisis without mentioning the overall context of the recent history of the country, which mainly after the 2015 political crisis saw a lot of tension between the international community and the government, which or the generated distrust and the reduction of funding, direct assistance, but also reduction basically of attention to this crisis, which ended up being almost forgotten. And of course, there is an issue of also the narrative, because the Burundi crisis, the narrative was used to be major human losses, conflict, war. And once the war is not there, of course, the attention tends to go away, not considering that actually the crisis is still there and the underlying issues are unresolved. But now, of course, when you have a major climate crisis, it becomes like a very concerning. And of course, the local capacity of the media in terms of surfacing those issues in a credible manner, them being connected globally so that they can really influence the narrative, and in a way also that they connect to the population, the issues of the local population, so that they are not taxed with necessary partisanships, because it's a kind of sensitive situation where you ought to be like the media or the civil society in general ought to be very professional, very creative, very innovative, and very connected, so that they stand the ground to influence. So of course, it's very important to say that the media internationally and locally, and we have the chance to talk about it, they are prone to speak up about certain crises, but really about the climate crisis or those slow onset, like for instance, the crisis of arable land, when you have returnees, population on a small land. Those are the kind of crises which don't get necessarily the headline and the attention. And also when you have the geopolitics, when you are close to a big country like DRC with that major crisis, of course, a crisis like in Burundi will look small and possibly will be overlooked easily. And of course, everybody is trying to do its part, including CARE and the other civil society organization. I have to just talk about it in the debate which we follow. But again, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to engaging with you all in this debate. Over to you, Edith.
Thank you very much, Afrika, for those very evocative and insightful opening remarks. Pierre, if you don't mind switching back your camera on, would like to have you in this discussion now. But I'd like to throw the question back to you, Afrika, because you have mentioned a lot the history of Burundi. Can you give us a context into how the country has come to this point where it's being ranked as being one of the top 10 humanitarian crises in the world?
Yes, no, thank you for that question. It's very an important one and not easy one. But let me start by saying, as I said, the magnitude of the crisis comparing to the size of the country. And it's really huge and the length of that situation. It's very important to context of a country which experienced long years of social instability, political instability. Then, of course, with the fragility of the economy, that all has translated into the weakening of the people's livelihoods, people capacities to cope. And as I said, more recently, like any country, when you get the inflows of capital, like the direct assistance, when it's cut or reduced, of course, a country like Burundi, which of course is connected and depends on this kind of international solidarity, and when that sees or it's negatively affected by the trust or mistrust between the players, of course, the whole infrastructure weakens substantially. And then when a crisis like the rising floods of the Lake Tanganyika or the closure of the borders due to the pandemic, and or maybe the fluctuation, the inflation, and so on, all those, when they came, they hit a very weakened socioeconomic infrastructure. And that is, fortunately, I think of course, like the magnitude, who talks about the crisis and how it gets talked about, it's very important. But in this case, we are here because it's not well covered, and for different reasons, we have to. I mentioned some of them, but I have a chance to discuss others as well. Thank you.
All right, well, let's bring in the journalist, Pierre. Why do you think that the situation that Africa is describing, which sounds desperate and really newsworthy, is not making it to Western headlines or even regional headlines? I'm sitting in Kenya and I rarely hear news coming out of Bujumbura.
Well, thank you for this interesting question. Actually, it's all about the relationship between the country and the international community, or let's talk generally, the relationship between the country and other countries, I mean. Well, I must say, if for example, let's say before we get to dig deep into this not being reported internationally, then the biggest question is it at least reported in the country? Let's forget a little bit about the region. Let's forget a little bit about the international community. So there is, first of all, this problem of a lot goes unreported, or even, or just say underreported in the country. So, but that's more or less the issue of lack of finance. And the country director of CARE International has said part of that, because the majority of the media in the country used to get funds from the international organizations, and which cut some of the funding due to the political crisis that's occurred in the country back in 2015. So that's actually one of the biggest problem. So then back to your question, I think it's all due to the fact that Burundi has kind of isolated itself, I mean, on the international political scene from other countries. And this has actually had some kind of impact. So that's all maybe I could say about that.
All right, Pierre, I'm going to come back to you with a follow-up question. But first, I'd like to introduce our third panelist. She's a little bit late, but we say better late than never. Ladies and gentlemen, Aline Dusabe. She's a Burundian national as well. She holds a master's degree in media management, and she works as a field consultant for the Stiftung Entwicklung Zusammenarbeit. Oof. SEZ for short. She works out of Stuttgart and is also a program manager at Radio Bonesha FM, an independent radio in Burundi. Thank you for joining us, Aline. And what you've missed is opening remarks from Africa, who has given us a clear indication of what the general problems are. And we've just gotten out of a question with Pierre where I asked him why he thinks that there's no reporting happening even in the region. And he's just responded by saying that actually it's not even being reported within within the country. And you said something interesting, Pierre, that the country has isolated itself. Do you think it has, or do you think the world has isolated it?
Well, I can say both. First of all, because of the internal problems that the country has been going through since the past few years, let's say dating back from 2015. So there is this problem. Okay, the country said, the government, of course, well, we are self-sufficient. We can get everything. We can do everything we want by our own means, by mobilizing the population. So that means that's isolating oneself. And the international community set some kind of obligations if no human rights are respected, if there is no inclusive dialogue between opponents and pro-government people. So we are not going to support you. So we isolated ourselves, but also the international community kind of isolated us. But that was back then. I think the situation is gradually improving.
All right, Aline, maybe paint a picture for us. What is it like right now in Burundi for the average, 15 or 30-year-old?
Okay, I would like just to apologize to be late. I think the point of view is different if you are in Burundi and someone who is abroad. For example, Jean-Pierre, I know him, he's a journalist as me. I take the time to greet him. I think the thing has positively changed in Burundi since the election, 2020 election. Yes, as an example, the dialogue between the European Union and Burundi began this year, things which was not happen since 2015. The European Union has been represented by the delegate of European Union in Burundi, accompanied by the ambassador of Germany and France and Belgium. This is things which is positive for us as Burundians, some people who live in Burundi. And after that, some effort has been done. Some media which has been destroyed in 2015 has been allowed to work in February. I can take the example of Bonesha FM, the one I work with it. And also the media that Jean-Pierre work, also Iwachu Online has been allowed to work. Also, there is dialogues between international media which has been closed, such as BBC and Voice of America. These are things that I can say that thing is come positively rather than before the 2015 crisis. Yes.
Right. So you're saying to me that the media space has dramatically changed since 2015. It's now more open, more free. But Africa, the point I was trying to get at with Aline is, paint for me a picture of the normal average Burundian and how these crises fit into their world. I'm just trying to figure out what it's like to live there at the moment.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. CareWorks has been working with local communities on ground and frontline. The everyday Burundian is very resourceful, and really you would be amazed, very hopeful, and trying to sort out problems by him or herself, and partially and because of that, of course, history of self-reliance or reliance on communities, community solidarities. You have a lot of, we work mainly with women and youth, getting into groups, organizing themselves, trying to solve their problems, trying to save little money they have, initiating activities. Those are the women on the front line. Of course, you have youth, because it's, as I said in the beginning, it's a very youthful country. Of course, the issues of unemployment and income generation. You have youth trying to make a living. That's a country you'll be amazed how you look, and those bicycle, like youth riding bicycle, transporting all those big roads, loads of goods, so trying to make a living. So it's really everyone wants stability, wants to look forward, a future perspective, and that's why anything really I feel like which draws back or gets back to the past history tends not to be very helpful. Of course, it's very important to look into that, but there's so much troublesome behind that it makes sense to look very much to the future. And that's where you see the people we work with, those women and youth, they are really full of hope and trying to make a lot of less the little they have in terms of resources. That's how I could respond to your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Afrika. And to you, Pierre, you know, we're being told that it's a youthful, hopeful population which wants to put its past behind. And yet, when you look at the numbers, they don't look very good. 90% of the population relies on subsistence farming, yet natural disasters keep ravaging the country. How does that balance out?
Well, actually, this is a very big issue. When we see the larger numbers of youth being unemployed, and many of them cannot even get a kind of school degree they would wish to get, just because of the problems that the country, financial problems that the country has been into, or the financial crisis, or just this kind of mindset. I just want to take this this time to thank some of the international organizations supporting some other organizations in the country. I remember back in the days, I've been collaborating with CARE International in Burundi about reporting on issues like gender equality, youth empowerment, or women empowerment. And this has kind of transformed the society into the program, into the project like win-win Abatanga Mutu approach, where they start to mobilize the population, the youth, to make themselves feel that they can make something very big for themselves, not relying upon any help whatsoever. So this is really something any other person would appreciate. So with some of its program, I have been working closely with CARE International. I know what has been doing with some of its projects, and I have been on the ground with CARE International, and I have seen the project it carries out, for example, in the north of the country, where you see violence, gender-based violence are really very much on a rise, and how women are taught to report gender-based violence or domestic violence, and this is all good. And the point again on the youth being able to make some kind of income generating activities. So this is really, really very much strong. But when we try to see where we were before and where we are now, so of course there has been some kind of improvement, but I must also say that a lot needs to be done. So youth mentality must change, and the government itself must get involved to help them create their own enterprises and focus much more on entrepreneurship. And this is what CARE International is doing. This is what World Vision is doing. So then a big round of applause to international organizations being involved in changing the youth's mentalities, and by making them feel or believe that the better future lies in their own hands, and this most importantly by rolling up their sleeves and start working hard.
Okay, so very much, you know, obviously you keep impressing upon us the importance of these international organizations, particularly one like CARE. But even if CARE had the money to spend on Burundi and limitless amount, it still wouldn't be enough, which begs the question, Aline, where is the government? Because Burundi has posted negative GDP growth in the last 5 years. So is there a strategy from your government to get the country out of these economic hooks, or where do you see the future?
Yes, now, as my colleague said, the Burundi has many catastrophe disaster in this time, and live in extreme poverty. Even the government make some effort to, they realize that they need financial from other countries. I think all other help will be welcome by the government, but I think those humanitarian organization must arrange how they can talk with the government, and also encourage, as Jean-Pierre says, young organization, for women and youth, in order to get job, because now 19% of youth are in employee. Even the government has installed the politics of self-empowerment, but they lack of finance. I think it could be better if they could, if CARE can invest in Burundi. I think they are welcome.
Okay, yes. Very much welcome, but you say a lot still needs to be done. Did I get you right? You said 90% of the youth are currently unemployed.
Yes.
Wow, that is truly staggering. And before we go to climate change and climate hazards, because I know that's a big one, I'd like to take some questions from our audience. Let's begin with Zabina Vilke. She asks, what do young people aspire to in Burundi? Do they seek to migrate? Are neighboring states an attractive alternative? Or do young Burundians wish to stay in their country? And do they feel that there is progress? Pierre, I think I want to ask you this one, because you are currently living in Germany, and yet you're saying that Burundians are the ones who need to take action in Burundi.
Well, actually, I wouldn't say that the youth alone can take actions, but for the youth to be where really they wish to be. So there has to be an involvement, not only of themselves, but also some kind of government involvement. Of course, I know I'm a young man. Well, I have been in contact with my young people in the country. I know what they have been doing. I know how hard they struggle to really make their life better. But still, there are many, many problems preventing them from achieving what they would like to do. So most often is where you would like to do something and you realize that it's not really a perfect ground for you to be able to make some kind of progress ahead. So you can think of a project, but you can see, well, this project in the country won't generate any income. So then you can start, for example, thinking about what if I try Uganda? Many of my friends, they went to Uganda. Many of my friends went to Kenya. So where there is mobility, there is this kind of movement within the East Africa. So they go in different countries, but also we can't forget another number of young people who say, well, Burundi is a beautiful country. It has a lot of opportunities. I know some of my friends are really making it big, but they say, why should we go abroad? So it's all about what you aspire to becoming in your future life. And it all starts with the mentality. If you think that what you need, you can still find it through hard work, through government support, and you can reach it, it's all fine. I know some organization, Juvenal Afulika, his organization, Care International, works with some other organization which bring together a large numbers of youth. I know those organizations, and when they are together, they learn a lot. They do more. Now you can see there has been a very positive impact on the work that these organizations are doing. And you can see that the youth now are starting to love their country, seeing the best in the country. So if the government could still also invest more, do more, I must tell you, nobody would think about going to Germany, going to the United States. Everything, we can still find it there.
Okay, Pierre, thank you for that. So Afurika, let me come to you with a question that actually was raised sometime 2 weeks ago when we were talking about the Central African Republic. Is there a risk that when organizations like CARE International, for example, are working so hard in these nations, it makes the government lazy about creating the infrastructure that these international organizations are now putting up? So if everything to do with the country is being done by international bodies, does the government then stop doing their job? I don't know how you feel about that.
Yes, no, that's a very important question, but let me mention something on the youth mobility briefly. I think to be honest, the mobility, the inclusion of youth, including a regional perspective, it's an option. And I know, for instance, the president now is traveling to Kenya, like the country being part of these big blocks, the East African community, the SADC, the Southern African Community. It's very important because there is still, of course, much you can do in a country, in a market like Burundi, but opening up the regional market, it's very important for a perspective, including for the youth who can now, once they are creative, once they are entrepreneurial, make money in country or even outside the country in the neighboring countries. But I know Burundian really in peaceful time, they like being home and being able to go and come home. So I feel it's a great opportunity to have those cross-border trade and ventures. So that regional integration is very important. On the government being displaced by international NGO, I think it's a myth in a sense that, first of all, international NGO cannot do anything, everything. We can't build roads, we can't build hospitals, we can't build schools, or we can build some schools, but you can't build a whole system, education system or health system or infrastructure like roads. Those big infrastructure, the policies, enabling either the community action, community initiative, those are the kind of policies which are fully in the realm of the government. Of course, in the context of humanitarian crisis, when there is a gap of resources, international NGO will be doing things which are really normally, as we think in care, they shouldn't be doing, like providing like basic handout and so on. That's in crisis, but normally, really as care, we are focusing on strengthening capacities of communities, of local organization, of social entrepreneurs to test and create creative solutions and bring them to scale. And for those solutions to go to scale, you need the policy of the government. You need to have, making the business better and so on. All those kind of enabling policies are the realm of the government, and those big infrastructure and institutionalizing all this work the international NGOs and local NGOs are doing. So there is place for everybody. And it's a myth that international, actually it's not possible in a sense that the international NGOs or players can displace a government in the development of its own country and of its own people.
Okay, some very interesting views there. So we now go into climate change. It surprised me to learn that Burundi is one of the worst affected countries when it comes to climate change. And in 2019, it's probably one of the worst years in terms of flooding. Aline, I see you nodding. How has the climate situation exacerbated the humanitarian crisis in your country?
It is a pity. We are, I think, the first one with the flooded. Now at Gatumba, there are more than 10,000 people who have been displaced because of flooded. Now they live in a critical situation where they have been displaced. You can imagine young girls of teenagers, now they become prostitutes because of this natural catastrophe in Burundi, because when they have been gathered together, they have no food, they have nothing to eat, no water. They live in a critical situation, and it is too sad. Now, even the administration confirmed that. They said that they have nothing to do. It is not possible to stop prostitution on that area because of the poverty. Do you imagine, Edith, one of the administration say there is nothing to do. They must do that in order to survive. Even if you ask that young girls why you do that, they say, I want to go to do that because I want to find some little money to feed my family. I have a testimony to 2 young girls with 13 years. They are pregnant now. When I ask them on my interview, they say, who is the owner of your pregnancy? They say, we don't know because we have many partners. Do you imagine 15 young girls with multiple partners and then they become pregnant? So those natural catastrophe is a big challenge. So it is an emergency. Burundi needs an emergency support for that, because it's not only Gatumba, it's also all the river Tanganyika. There are also other natural catastrophe in the Bujumbura Rural, in some provinces. This is a disaster in my country. And also we can add COVID-19 on that. COVID-19 has affected socio-economic rather than health. More than 18, I can say more than 1,000 people lost their job. Many women lives daily with small businesses with our neighbors. All borders has been closed. Now they are here. They don't have something to eat to feed their families, because many women, African women, as the chief of the family. Now it is a big issue. There are some I can enumerate for a humanitarian crisis in Burundi. I mean COVID, I mean flooded, also the returnee refugees. Those are three big catastrophes we have in the country without help to overcome this. This is our big issue that we are facing in Burundi. Thank you.
Okay, let me get Pierre to jump in on this, because I see that he's also raised his hand. Aline has introduced two different elements here, that because of the flooding, you have a lot of internally displaced people. And we obviously know that last year, your president did say that if you've been a refugee, come back. So you have an influx of returnees with internally displaced persons, with floods where 90% of the population depends on these farms. How do you stop such a crisis? Is it even possible?
Well, this is really a very crucial question. Well, as far as I'm concerned, well, as a young person, it's not possible for me to stop it. It's a natural disaster. Okay, so I've got no power over it. But before I get to respond or get back to you, I would like to say and to raise another point, which another also very important factor of people fleeing the country, which is drought. And this is most often reported in the north, specifically in Kirundo. Well, I have been, while I was still working in the country as a journalist, I've covered a lot of stories about drought, how people, especially, so within this period, okay, coming period, so the people, they flee the country just because of drought. And drought is part of climate change, and it's something we cannot do anything about. You see, you walk around 40, 50 kilometers, and you see there is not a single tree you can see some kind of limb on it. It's really very scary. The people's seeds, you just plant and you can't get anything. So some of them prefer to flee or to try life in neighboring countries, specifically Rwanda and Tanzania. So this is also very terrible. And again, with these floods in the country, so when it rains, it does not simply rain, it pours. It's really very scary. People's homes get destroyed, and the people don't have where to spend at least a single night. It's really very terrible. And this comes to add to what the whole world saw happening in Gatumba, where so many hundreds of people have been obliged to move to other places to be able to continue to live. So this is really very terrible. But again, I don't think we as simple people can do anything about it. I don't think the government itself can do more about it. So it's really a very challenging question.
So Afurika, let me come to you. Why is Burundi so disproportionately affected by climate change? I mean, this is something that's affecting a lot of nations in sub-Saharan Africa, but it seems to be really beating on Burundi hard.
Yes, no, that's a fact. First of all, let's the topography of the country. Like the country is hilly. It's largely it's a hilly. It's a 1,001 hills, beautiful hills. But when it rains, there is erosion. So the good soil is washed away. And so, and also infrastructure, the roads. Many you have like in the recent rainy season, you have two major or three actually major roads, national roads, were cut and bridges collapsing, and these are major feeder roads for the economy, linking urban and rural. So the topography of the country is very made it the soil to erode, and for instance, then people will tend to follow the good land in the lowlands, and then when the lake is rising, then it will catch up of those people who left the highlands to go to lowlands, following the arable lands, which has been washed away from uphill to downhill. So that's of course, also when you have subsistence farming, when you don't use those heavy infrastructure like terracing and so on, that underinvestment in agriculture makes it very vulnerable to climate crisis like rains or drought. So that's a combination, as I say. Unless we did talk about the politics also. Like if you have been a population running for many years, like people have been being displaced by conflict. Of course, things that have changed remarkably now. But remember, the past years, people were on the run all the time, so they didn't have the chance to take care of their lands, to invest in their lands, because they were constantly being displaced by those trouble and political or even war. So that combination of not being able to take care of the land is small, it's on the hills, and then you have few infrastructure. All that makes it wanting to really to be creative, finding creative solutions. That's where CARE and the organization we work with, we are really heavily into social innovations and really promoting those innovators, communities, youth to find solutions, and then ask the government to take those solutions to scale them up. But there's no easy answer, and the creativity and the international solidarity and these kind of events like covering, getting to know what's happening and really having this kind of support, positive support is very, very important. Thank you.
Okay, now you did mention politics, and that leads me to our second question from our viewer, one of our viewers, Carlo Parizel, I hope I said your name right, who asks, Pierre, to you specifically, what programs have Burundi government ever issued for young people? How about the numbers of unemployed for young ones? Why are you always referring to the government? I don't know which one you want to start with, why you always refer to the government, or what programs they've initiated and put in place, because let's be honest, it is their job.
Yes. Well, I must say, you all know that there is no lasting development if the government is really not involved. So I believe that the government in each and every sector of the country's life must play a very important role. And then I go straight to the point where he asked, he or she, I'm not sure about the gender. So, but I will say I'm not really quite sure what I would say about this. But I heard and I read there has been this initiative. The government of Burundi has set up a bank specifically dedicated to helping the young people who have very brilliant idea, very brilliant projects, so that they can be funded to carry out their project. So that's a very good initiative, although who gets support and who does not get it, still always a bone of contention. We don't know. So that's one example. And also the other example, there has been this recent creation of cooperatives on all the hills, on all the collines in the country. So this brings together the people for them to carry out some agricultural activities, farming, and this helps people fight hunger. And this also helps much more. So then by saying that, by referring to the government, is because I wanted to stress the importance of government in transforming the country's life. And I'm not just saying that we could fold our arms like this and not do anything, but it's up to the government to also draw up some clear lines up to where it wishes to see its population in the next 5, 10, 15, or 20 years. So that's actually what I wanted to say.
Okay, I think that's clear, Pierre. Thank you. So, Aline, which now leads me to solutions. An organization such as yours, SEZ or CARE, where do you even begin when it comes to prioritizing who gets what need, who gets support first? Because as you said, there's many layers to this crisis.
I think the priority will going to women and young girls because they are the most victims of that situation. I mean, COVID-19, I mean, flooded, also the returnee refugees. The many vulnerable are women and girls because all three humanitarian crises are really have the consequence of gender-based violences, because girls and women are most pushed on those kinds of, as the example I give you for prostitution, for young girls to be prostitutes, and the consequence is to get AIDS and other things. I think the priority will be I can say the emergency support will going toward those women living in a refugee camp, those women in a victim of flooded, and also for COVID-19. Edit before Burundian girls don't use to migrate to other countries, but now because of the situation of the country, we report thousands of young women or girls go to Arabic country to search for a job, and the consequence of that, many of them coming in Burundi as becoming mad, others become foolish, and others become disabled because of those slavery they meet in those Arabic countries. You see how our young girls face a problem because of the catastrophe which are in our country. It's why I say that, of course, with young boys also are among the vulnerable, but the younger are most ones. It's why the emergency support can go directly to those kind of people. As I say at SEZ, in our approach, we help small businesses, small entrepreneurship. As last year, we support some projects. As an example, the support of young girls victim of slavery in Arabic country where they going to search for a good life, but when they arrive there, they was deceived by that. When coming back to Burundi, they have their own association, and now there is a little bit project they have supporting by SEZ. I know that even CARE International, CARE Burundi do the same as SEZ in Burundi. Thank you.
All right, and Africa, we come to you. An organization like CARE in Burundi, in light of COVID-19, how are you prioritizing, and what do you need most, from the world, essentially?
Yes, no, thank you for that question. Let me start from the end of your question. What does CARE or Burundi needs from the world? I think it's very important, of course, international solidarity and the positive narrative, if I could say. Let me say that in Burundi, in a country like Burundi, scarcity scares. Let me explain what it means. When there's a narrative of everything is scarce, it's landlocked, poor, very poor, troubled, and so on, that scares people out of even, they get off the balance, even including the youngsters. They will want to leave everything behind to escape, because, and also that also scares the elite, because there is little, we need to make sure we hold it ourselves, we don't share because it's little. So I think that narrative, the narrative on the country international hasn't been helpful. I think that needs to change, and that there is a role of media to change that narrative, going back to how the country is resourceful, hopeful, emerging, and needs support. Of course, like as CARE, we are very much into those support to community initiative. It's post-pandemic. Everywhere it's really community-based recovery. It's not realistic to expect that the government will pick it up and start invest huge resources which it doesn't have. But the resource of this country is the resourcefulness of its people, its women, its youngsters. So we are trying to get those hubs, like Centre de Jeunes, these youth centers, and youth groups, women's groups, to have to generate their own solution, to create solution. We are trying to discover those talents, those innovators, and it's very important, as besides the bank, that is youth bank, if you connect those initiatives, those solutions to globally, like to link the country's initiative to those global sponsors, mentors, coach, even like funders, or to help those community initiatives to recover post-pandemic. That will be very important, and that will really galvanize, will create a positive momentum. And of course, we'll be working with civil society organizations to influence the government to have positive policies to enable this to happen, and to enable peace, of course, and security and prosperity for all, inclusive policies that which not discriminate and create tension and distrust. So I think that kind of new narrative, new solidarities, focusing on community initiative, youth initiative, allowing the government to play its role and start building through those trusting relationship between the government and the international communities. And as it's happening now, it's very important to create a positive momentum forward. Thank you.
All right, and Pierre, I'll start off your question with another question from one of our viewers who asked Berger France, if youth mentality is a problem, how could international media coverage help to resolve a change in mindset of domestic violence? This was when you were speaking on domestic violence earlier. But the larger question here is the role of media, specifically Western media. How would putting a spotlight on what is going on in Burundi change the country?
Well, I think I am not really quite well placed to respond to this question, because you don't know the editorial guideline of any of the international medias. You don't know what they would like to broadcast. You don't know what they would like to publish or air. So then that means much more I would direct this question to the role of the internal media in helping people change the mentality. Because, well, if, for example, CNN or any Der Spiegel here in Germany or DW here says, well, the fact of domestic violence or youth being together in the country is not really part of our focus, for example. So we are interested in this, so we can't do anything about it. But for us, as people of the media in the country, we have a very big role to play by not only criticizing where something goes wrong, but by also making people know what have been the changes in the country. But for example, I must repeat what I said before. The biggest problem in the country is, as far as media is concerned, is lack of funding. And we all know the background. We have talked much more about it. So it's hard for journalists like me to go and carry out investigation on domestic violence in Kirundo or in Mwaro or in any other faraway province if I don't have means. So first I need to have means and be able to cover that. And when I cover that and publish it online, probably that would attract the international organization or media, and they would like to tackle this angle and take it seriously. But it all starts within the country before it reaches the international community.
All right, got you. And I really like that point. Aline, I know you want to add something, but unfortunately we're running out of time. And I have one last question for you all. Please fill this sentence, complete this sentence. In order for Burundi to thrive, it needs dash and dash. Aline, I think we'll begin with you because you already had a thought going.
Let's answer this with one answer. As Jean-Pierre said, the only problem is that there is no communication and partnership between those humanitarian organizations and media, local media, even international. It's why before invest in those kind of humanitarian crises, we must invest in media. Even those international media, as Jean-Pierre says, even those international media, they have, of course, the editorial guidelines, but they report about catastrophe in Iraq, in Palestine, in why on those 10 forgotten countries. I mean, the first is there is no interest for those international media or for what's happening, for example, in Burundi. Why they can't put in their podcast about what happened in Burundi, for example, in humanitarian crisis for Gatumba flooded, and then they up that. So if someone wants to donate something, when they click on it, they saw directly what is happening in Burundi, something which is in update.
All right, so Aline, just to circle back, you think that in order for Burundi to thrive, it needs, you said, first of all, better regional integration and stronger media.
Yes,
yeah?
Of course.
All right. Okay, Pierre, let's come to you then. What do you think Burundi needs to thrive?
Well, for Burundi to be able to thrive, all it needs is just taking a step forward and just in improving its relations with other countries. Here, I mean the international community. Because as we know the resources we have, it's not really enough. So then we need much of the support for us to be able to thrive, for our youth to be able to work. So then the international community to be able to fund some of our projects needs some trust from us. So then that means the government must do really a lot for the international relations to really be as good as they used to be before 2015. And I must say, it's a really kind of on good track now with the government of with the current government. We believe that tomorrow after tomorrow things will be better. Yeah.
All right, Afurika, we've got about 30 seconds for you to answer this question. In order for Burundi to thrive, it needs dash and dash.
Two things. Burundi needs a strong social entrepreneurship ecosystem and social entrepreneurship ecosystem. Second, it needs really inclusion, gender equality, so that women and youth can participate fully. Thank you.
All right. Well, just on time. Thank you so much, Afurika Juvenal, Aline Dusabe, Pierre-Emmanuel Ngendakumana. It's been a riveting dialogue. Thank you so much for your views. We hope you learned something as our viewers. And from me here in Nairobi, I say kwaheri. Thank you for watching.
Bye.
Bye. Usiku mwema. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Peace to next